All right, thanks everybody for joining. We're going to get started this morning for us on our launch webinar for the new series of ROTA Council briefs on rotavirus disease and immunization. So we're going to get started with our first speaker, Dr. Bill Moss.
Yes, and welcome to this ROTA Council webinar on rotavirus disease and immunization. My name is Bill Moss, and I'm the Executive Director of the International Vaccine Access Center here at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. And I'd like to say a few words about IVAC. We're located within the Department of International Health here at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. And we have a team of physicians, professors, economists, epidemiologists, researchers, and advocates all working together to achieve our mission, which is to accelerate the equitable and sustainable access to vaccines through the generation, synthesis, and use of evidence to inform decision-making and action. IVAC currently provides technical leadership in over 15 vaccine-preventable diseases and syndromes, including rotavirus and diarrheal diseases. Our work is based in rigorous science, clear communication, productive partnership, and capacity building. Technical advocacy is one of the core practices here at IVAC, where we empower advocates by providing scientifically precise messaging on the value of vaccine. ROTA Council is one of the leading efforts in technical advocacy for the prevention of diarrheal diseases. And I'm very excited to be participating in this ROTA Council webinar. I would like to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Mathu Santosham, who most of you, if not all of you, will know. Dr. Santosham is IVAC Senior Advisor and Chair of the ROTA Council. He's a professor of international health and pediatrics here at Johns Hopkins University and Director Emeritus of the Johns Hopkins Center for American Indian Health. Mathu.
Thank you, Bill. Welcome everyone from all parts of the world. I see that many of my friends and colleagues have signed in, and I apologize that it is not a very convenient time for many of you. I am so excited to be part of this. When I started my career in public health more than 3 decades ago, there were 5 million deaths each year. We've now brought it down to 500,000 or 500,000. That's tremendous progress, and just so wonderful for me to see that. But yet that translates to about 1,400 deaths per day. And preventing these deaths is critical, as you all know. The ROTA Council was started just with that purpose in mind. The council was created to be able to increase the use of rotavirus vaccine through advocacy, through consultation to countries, providing assistance to countries to apply for Gavi assistance, and to be available to countries when they needed information about rotavirus vaccine. And I have to say, it has been a tremendous success because of the wonderful council members we have across the world, and I will talk about them in a few minutes. The council has used evidence and strategic communication targeting both policymakers and key decision makers. We have over 20 council members in 15 countries. It goes across Brazil in South America to Bangladesh in Asia. And I would like to particularly thank the council members who I know are on the call, and so there may be others who are on the call that I don't know about. Please accept my thanks. Dr. Julie Bynes, Tony Nelson, George Arma, Azul Ismail, Oyewale Tamari, Umesh Barshar. These council members have not only provided support to the countries, many of them actually have assessed different vaccines. They've assessed the impact, assessed the vaccines in the development stage, got them to licensure, and have actually looked at the impact of these vaccines in their respective countries. We're also deeply grateful to both Pat and Sabin, who have been tremendously valuable as partners and have contributed a great deal to the ROTA Council. Later on, you will be hearing from the council members during the questions and answers session. And this brief highlight this morning, our time, this evening, your time, depending on where you are, highlights the improvements in rotavirus vaccine coverage and also the need for progress. It is very clear that although we have made tremendous progress, there's a lot more that needs to be done. Rotavirus vaccines use has climbed since 2013 from 53 countries to 98 countries. Almost 100 countries are now using the vaccine. 65 million infants now have access to the vaccine. That's almost half the world's children who live in areas where they can access the vaccine. That's the bright side. The other side is that there are still 71 million children who do not have access to the vaccine. That's about 53% of the world's children. We are delighted that many high mortality countries like India, Pakistan, Afghanistan have already introduced the vaccines. A few high mortality countries like Nigeria, Democratic Republic of Congo have already been approved by Gavi. And so they are well on their way to introducing rotavirus vaccine. We believe that all of you who are on this call are both capable and will use your energy and your talents to ensure that the rest of the world's children receive rotavirus vaccine. We are very, very grateful to you, and thank you for joining this call. I would now like to introduce my colleague, Molly Sauer, who's the Deputy Director of Policy at IVAC.
Thank you, Mathu and Bill. So thank you everyone for joining. And just as a reminder, if you have questions or any issues, my colleague Rose is manning our chat function here and can help you out with that. But what we're going to do now is switch over to some slides and introduce you to this new resource that has been developed to support your efforts as advocates, as technical experts in the field. Bear with us for one moment. All right, great. So what we're going to go through over the next 30 minutes or so is a couple items here. There's quite a lot to cover. And so we'll move through as quickly as we can, but certainly feel free to reach out to our team after this webinar if you have any questions or need for additional information. And towards the end of the session, as we mentioned, we'll have some time for questions if there are any, and give a bit of an overview of the timeline moving forward and when you can expect to see all of the resources we will be highlighting through today's webinar. So I'm going to give you a quick overview, building on what Mathu just spoke about, the ROTA Council as a body and what we have been doing over the past several years. We'll talk briefly about the white paper that you probably have already seen before, the resource that was released by our group in 2016. We will run through some of the updates that have taken place this year for our new release. I'm going to cover one of our briefs in depth and the rest of the 7 in a bit of a quick overview. And then we'll talk about how you can use these, where to find them, and what's coming soon. So as Dr. Santosham mentioned, the ROTA Council, or the Rotavirus Organization of Technical Allies, is an independent body of experts that has been around for several years to accelerate rotavirus vaccine introduction by synthesizing and using evidence and strategic advocacy and communication to engage with policymakers, decision makers, program officials, technical voices such as yourselves, and advocates to advance this mission. We have a number of core partners who are listed here on the top row. We here at the International Vaccine Access Center at Johns Hopkins University work closely with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, Georgia, PATH, and the Saban Vaccine Institute, both advocacy, policy, and technical organizations involved in immunization. We have some additional engagement and support from the following organizations at the bottom as far as funding goes: the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, GSK, and Bharat Biotech. Dr. Santosham mentioned that we are a diverse and globally reaching body of experts. We have 23 different members from more than 15 countries. As you can see here on the map, we've ensured that there's great representation from around the world, covering almost all of the regions as far as WHO regions at least are concerned. And you can see a number of our members here on the side. Several of our council members are on the line today and are great resources moving forward as you engage in advocacy in your respective countries or regions. Many of these are technical experts known not only in their countries but worldwide for their work in rotavirus, diarrheal disease, and child health broadly. So our role, as I mentioned, is largely to facilitate advocacy and policy efforts by providing technical evidence to individuals, to organizations, and to ministries of health as needed. We do a lot of communication, so heavily focused on synthesizing evidence and sharing that with key voices that can help to advance immunization and the comprehensive approach to diarrheal disease prevention and control. As a body of experts, we are a resource for government officials, programs, policymakers to accelerate access to these life-saving and health-improving vaccines. So in 2016, after a couple years of in-depth assessment of the evidence base around rotavirus disease, available vaccines, the impact of those vaccines, and where we need to go, in order to actually start to combat those high numbers of deaths that Dr. Santosham alluded to, we released a white paper, which you can see here. This was, at the time, a comprehensive snapshot of all the available evidence that we could find on rotavirus disease. We looked at several different aspects, from the epidemiology and disease burden to the economic cost of disease and impact of the vaccine, and then really highlighted a number of key areas needing further investigation, further advocacy, further effort to really move forward rotavirus vaccine access. That was 2016. And in the time since then, we have worked really closely with a number of you on this call and a much broader network around the world to understand what worked and what didn't about this paper. What are some of the areas that needed additional information? What are some of the areas where perhaps we needed to go a bit in more depth? What were some of the research gaps? And how could we really make sure that this document, as we provide it, is of use to you as advocates, technical experts, and in cases, policymakers? So with that in mind, what we have done is a full refresh. Since 2016, as was noted, there's been tremendous progress in introductions. And what you see here is the current status of rotavirus vaccine introduction. We have a total of 98 countries that have introduced the vaccine nationally or subnationally, including some phased national rollouts that are underway. But as you can see from the map, there's quite a lot of gray still remaining, and there are a lot of countries that have yet to make a decision about introducing rotavirus vaccines into their national programs. And those countries that have made decisions and have not yet rolled out have faced a number of challenges, delaying or indefinitely stalling their introductions. So it's really a critical time to continue to elevate this evidence, make sure that it's reaching the voices that have a say in policy and program, and ensuring that everyone is really well informed and starts to identify and address the research and programmatic gaps that remain to help us ensure this map becomes completely blue and that children worldwide have access to this critical vaccine. So our recent launch and what we're here to talk about today is the new 2019 update to this previous white paper. What we did for this new version is, again, took all of your feedback. So there were really three key components to the revision. The first is that we updated the evidence. We did a comprehensive literature review, spoke to additional experts, including our council members, to understand what evidence exists, what has come about since our last white paper, and how can we really leverage that to advance our advocacy policy program goals. We have refreshed the visuals and graphics throughout these series of briefs. One of the things that we heard from a number of stakeholders was that the visual aspects are really powerful in talking to policymakers and program officials. And any way that we can show the literature, show the evidence in different ways to reach different learners is very effective. And of course, the more eye-catching it can be, the better. And then finally, as you can see here, we did a full restructure. So I think what I'm most excited about as far as the briefs as a body is that it is now a series of briefs rather than a booklet. One of the things we heard from all of you was the booklets are great. It's great to hand off one large resource to stakeholders, but the more useful we can be in targeting our engagement based on what someone is actually interested in learning about or has a vested interest in needing to know, that's going to be the most powerful way. So we've restructured the white paper into 7 briefs, or what we like to think of it as 6 briefs and a bonus. To the left of this side, up until the yellow and purple ones, are our 6 core briefs. And these highlight 6 areas of the rotavirus disease and immunization story that we know are really critical in discussing program expansion, accelerating coverage, and ensuring these vaccines reach every child. So we have a brief highlighting the epidemiology and disease burden of rotavirus. We talk about the impact of rotavirus vaccines in the countries where they're used routinely. We have a bit of a highlight on safety. We discuss the economic cost of the disease and the value of vaccines. So what's the economic impact where these vaccines are in routine use? We highlight introduction and coverage status, which is a very dynamic topic, but really critical to understand why we need to accelerate. And then we also have a brief that spotlights all of the currently available vaccines, both those that are WHO pre-qualified and globally available, as well as those that are domestic or nationally licensed, and then a couple of the up-and-coming products that are expected in the next couple of years. And then our bonus brief is a little bit different. So this is taking a step back from rotavirus and looking broadly at the impact of early childhood diarrhea. So we're looking at all causes and the health, development, economic impacts of repeat prolonged episodes of diarrhea early in a child's life and how that can affect the system broadly. So what I'm going to do now is dig into one of our briefs that is going to be coming most imminently to your doorsteps, and that is our introduction and coverage brief. And we'll go through this in a bit of depth, and then I will quickly run through the remaining 6 so that you can get a taste of what's coming your way. So introduction and coverage status is constantly top of mind for our team and many others of really wanting to understand the picture of where are children receiving these vaccines in the countries that have introduced them, how equitable is that coverage, are there challenges with scaling up coverage, and then where are the gaps that remain, where can we target our efforts as advocates, where are there questions that impact policy or programs. So what we do in this brief is walk through exactly that. We summarize the introduction status worldwide, and then we go into some of the core messages that are really important for policy and program officials to know, both at the country level and at the global and regional levels. So what you can see on this slide is 5 of the key takeaways from this brief, which you will find listed on the back for easy access. And what we have found is that through going through this process of revising the briefs, we've tried to really pare down the core takeaways of this analysis and the evidence available, again, with an eye towards what policymakers, program officials, and advocates really need quick access to. So on each brief, including this introduction and coverage one, you will find on the back a series of 3 to 5 key takeaways. And those are probably the most important thing for you to take a look at when you actually access them, to understand in a 30-second speech, elevator speech, what are the main things I need to highlight in speaking about this particular topic. And then we paired all of this with really compelling graphics to highlight some of the key issues. So for introduction and coverage, I wanted to spotlight one that I think is really powerful that addresses some of the coverage challenges that we see with rotavirus vaccines, where Often, rotavirus vaccines are lagging in coverage levels, even compared to DTP and other routine immunization programs that have been in place for equal or a bit longer time. So even after we pass out of that 3 to 5 year scale up period that most countries see, we're still seeing gaps in coverage for ROTA. So as you dig into this brief, I will walk you through the whole thing, and hopefully this can trigger some questions as we get into the discussion. But this is one of our more visually focused briefs, and we look forward to updating it as the introduction status evolves. As I mentioned, this is a really dynamic space, and it can be challenging to keep track of a lot of the countries making introduction decisions. So one of the things we want to highlight is the progress that's been made, particularly since 2006, when the 2 rotavirus vaccines currently used around the world that have been licensed the longest were licensed when only 8 countries were using them, to 2018 when we've reached 98 countries. About half of the world's countries now have introduced the vaccine nationally or subnationally. But as mentioned, we still have a long way to go to reach full global access to this. In this brief, we also spotlight a couple of those larger countries that have recently introduced, as Dr. Santosham mentioned, and some of the key points about those countries that help to accelerate rotavirus vaccine introduction. In this case, we talk about India, where indigenous vaccine development really helps speed up the process and ensure access, and we will loop back to that shortly. We talk about Pakistan, where there was subnational drive to roll the vaccine out and really helped accelerate to reach full national introduction in 2018. And then in Afghanistan, one of the other Gavi eligible countries that launched the vaccine in 2018, and some of the key questions that were raised to help policymakers and program officials make the decision to accelerate that introduction. And these are great resources as an advocate to talk about some of the success stories that have come across for rotavirus vaccines. In the brief, we then dig into sort of the flip side. What are some of the gaps and challenges that remain? And this is a hot topic that comes up very frequently in kind of the global advocacy space for rotavirus. What can we do to help accelerate introductions and at least to understand why this introduction process is lagging? And for rotavirus, one thing we frequently see is this challenge for middle-income countries. Gavi-eligible countries, low-income countries often are able to access co-financing or other financial support to help them make the decision to introduce these newer vaccines that can be a bit more expensive than the kind of traditional routine immunization options. And so there's a need to address some of these challenges for middle-income countries to ensure that they have access. These countries, particularly the lower income communities and families within those countries, are often at very high risk of severe outcomes from the disease. So it's a really critical next step for our global efforts. And what you can see below that is another visual to demonstrate what we're talking about of this middle income country gap and even high income country gap. On the other side, on the right side, you can see a summary of where we are as far as rotavirus vaccine access. So we have made tremendous progress in the last several years of scaling up introductions and increasing coverage in countries that have introduced, but there are huge gaps remaining. And about 3/4 of all children globally who do not currently have access to the vaccine, so live in a country that has not introduced the vaccine or live in a state that has not introduced the vaccine in the case of phased national rollouts. There are just 10 countries that cover that huge number of children. So as far as global advocacy efforts, this is a great opportunity for us to really target our engagement and try to maximize the impact early on. We also talk about some of the other barriers that have come up beyond just our middle-income countries facing financing challenges. There are some things that sort of kind of continue to come up despite being addressed a couple of times. Safety is one that we dig into a bit in a separate brief, but is a frequent question that comes up about rotavirus vaccines, despite there being a substantial body of evidence to outline the benefits to risk for these vaccines. There are many challenges with low burden, where countries perceive that there maybe is not a critical level of disease burden for rotavirus in their country, and particularly as we start to reduce mortality and see more of a morbidity burden, where there are a large number of hospitalizations or outpatient visits associated with the disease, but we aren't seeing the numbers that are quite as obvious as we did when there were high numbers of deaths. So we spotlight some of these key challenges to sort of bring everybody onto the same page and see where we can work to address these gaps. I mentioned looking at coverage as a really critical issue for ROTA and trying to address some of the gaps that remain. I think you can see in this map that we've pulled for the brief that there's really quite a range of coverage levels, even in some geographic areas where we might expect a bit more consistency. Even in the US here, we have just what we would classify as medium or moderate coverage in the 70 to 79% range for rotavirus vaccines. So definitely some countries that are very high performing in this area and a lot of very low performers. So we break this down a bit further in this brief to talk about the gap between DTP3 coverage, that complete course of pentavalent or another DTP containing vaccine, as compared to a complete course of rotavirus vaccines. And you can see quite a difference in the top, where we spotlight a couple of countries in the Africa region, several of which have quite comparable coverage between the two vaccines. And then looking more at high and upper middle income countries, where there's a substantial gap, with ROTA lagging quite far behind DTP containing vaccines. And we talk a little bit in this brief about possible reasons why that's happening, some of which derive from the early and no longer active age restrictions in place through the WHO recommendation, which have been since lifted, as well as some perceptions that persist from doctors and parents about the vaccine. And finally, in this one, we spotlight that WHO recommendation to really reinforce and highlight how critical it is that these vaccines be used worldwide. There's been some evolution in the recommendation as far as WHO's position paper, and we think it's really critical that everyone understand what the current recommendations are. So we have a bit of it here, but hope that anyone using this can go to the full paper and really understand why these recommendations are in place and how to effectively support them. And then, as I mentioned, all of our briefs end with a spotlight right on the back. So if you, like me, are frequently meeting with program officials or policymakers who only have just a moment to speak with you, this is a great way to hand a document to them and have the most critical messages easy to access right on the back of the booklet that you're passing off. So that's just not very quick, but a bit of a quick summary of our introduction and coverage brief. And now I'm just going to go very quickly through the remaining 6 so that you can see where we're headed. So I mentioned we have one on epidemiology and disease burden, which really spotlights our current understanding of both the number of deaths and hospitalizations associated with rotavirus, as well as some of the geographic spread of that, where we see more or less, how the vaccines placement and what countries are introducing may be aligned with epidemiology and disease burden, and particularly how ROTA ranks against some of the other key diarrheal disease pathogens, based on some reanalysis of a very well-known study, the GEM study. We talk about the impact of rotavirus vaccination, and this is a pretty substantial brief, I would say. It's quite in-depth, and there's a lot of content here. There has been a ton of new literature on the impact of rotavirus vaccines over the last couple years, even just since our 2016 white paper came out. So this is one great example to say that the intent of these briefs, while we hope that you can use them independently, is to build on some of the previous literature that's already been synthesized by the Council and other partners, that it's a great additional resource to add to the mix. In this, we speak quite a bit about where impact studies have been conducted. So just the wealth and diversity in countries that now have issued impact studies of some kind to demonstrate the value of rotavirus vaccines that have been introduced in their countries, and some of the data to reflect what has been seen in these countries. So we spotlight just one example here from Mexico, where there's a very clearly visible shift in the disease burden following vaccine introduction. And this is not unique to Mexico. We have some great examples from other countries that have done impact studies following introduction to show the substantial impact, not only on rotavirus hospitalizations and deaths, but on all-cause diarrhea as well. Our third brief focuses on the rotavirus vaccine landscape. So what products are currently available for countries, what products are available domestically in a subset of countries, and then what are some of the up and coming new frontiers for rotavirus vaccines. And this is a really timely piece. I think as Dr. Santosham mentioned, there's been a substantial shift in the product landscape over just the last year or two, where we went from having 2 globally available products, Rotarix and Rotatec, to now doubling that to 4, where there are now 4 WHO pre-qualified rotavirus vaccines available for countries to introduce. And so in this brief, we summarize all 4 of those products and really try to give some information to help countries understand the products and make informed decisions about introduction. As the landscape has expanded, there's also a much greater diversity in those products. So what you will see is a range of options and critical characteristics to be considered. We go into a bit of depth on that in this brief, but I do want to note that there are a number of other recently published resources to help paint that picture in more detail for countries, and all of those are referenced here, so they have easy access to things like product profiles from Gavi and WHO and other partners heavily involved in introductions. So again, the aim of this brief is really to provide a snapshot for country decision makers as well as advocates and technical experts who may be asked about or need to speak to the potential product choices for their respective countries and how this space is moving forward. We highlight a couple of the up and coming products, specifically a neonatal vaccine that is being developed in Indonesia with the Melbourne Children's Research Institute in Australia, a couple of reassortant vaccines, as well as an injectable subunit vaccine, to talk about what's coming next. But it's important to note that there are ongoing developments among the 4 pre-qualified vaccines as well. So we expect to have some updates to this brief as the years move forward and new products become available. As I mentioned, we have a brief summary on safety. This is a topic the Council has dug into in a lot of depth over the last couple of years, including convening experts and publishing a paper on the topic in 2016. So we really just summarized this here, specifically talking about intussusception, the concerns that have been raised over time, the origins of this safety issue as it relates to rotavirus vaccines, and then really focus on the benefit to risk ratio. There's been a ton of literature coming out, in particular some analyses out of countries in Africa that have introduced the vaccine to demonstrate that the benefits far outweigh the risks for a rotavirus vaccine. But it's still important to understand this issue and for advocates and technical experts to be well prepared to answer questions that may come up about it. One of the topics that we touched on briefly in the previous white paper, but didn't go into too much depth on, was the economic component. And that was one that we heard from a lot of stakeholders that is of interest and is really important as they are engaging with policymakers, that now that our understanding of burden has evolved and a lot are starting to recognize the need for the vaccines from a health perspective, it's important to understand the economic components and make the case from that side. So in this brief, we spotlight not only the cost of the disease in countries across income and geographic categories, but also the impact that's been seen in countries that have introduced the vaccine. So I spotlight one of our graphics here, talking about the savings from introducing the vaccine in Australia. But really, this chapter is intended to be used not only for immunization program managers, but in many cases, we know a lot of you are working with finance ministries, with other funding or financing bodies who really want to understand the economic component. So hopefully this brief can help facilitate that. And then lastly, our bonus brief focused on broad impacts of early childhood diarrhea. Again, this is not a rotavirus-focused brief, and we want to be very, very clear about that we aim here to address some of the questions that have been raised to our organization as well as to a number of partners about the lasting effects that prolonged and repeated episodes of diarrhea can have on growth, development, educational attainment, and other key questions. So this brief very quickly goes over some of the data that's available in that space, and identify some of the areas where there's additional information needed or progress to be made in our understanding of this space. Again, this is a topic that we didn't really go into in our previous white paper, and heard from all of you that it was really important to have this as a resource, particularly because our overall goal is to present rotavirus vaccines as part of a comprehensive approach to diarrheal disease control and prevention. So this is really important, not just on the rota side, but specifically for a lot of those other causes of diarrhea that affect child health broadly. So with that, I will pause on going over these briefs and give a bit of an overview of where we go from here, and then I think we'll open it up for any questions that have come through. So you've now seen our 7 briefs in brief and gotten a bit of a taste of what's coming. And in the spirit of immunization programs, we are going with a phased rollout here. So the first brief that will be coming your way is the one we talked about in depth, our introduction and coverage brief, which will be coming to you in the next day or so. It will be available on our website, rotacouncil.org. From there, we're going to be phasing out these briefs so that you can access them over the next couple weeks. We will be sure to let everyone on this webinar and our broader audience know as new ones are released, and we would love to hear how you are using them. If you have feedback to help us inform the next refresh, anything to really help advance this. And I think over time, it's great for us to collect some of that information and understanding of how you're using these, and stories about how they've been effective in supporting your efforts to inform other advocates and really help us refine our approach here. As far as using them, these are going to be available as electronic files, so you will find them as PDFs on the website, which means that you are more than welcome to download them, print them, to share them electronically, whatever is most appropriate for your uses. They are certainly yours to use. And if you have specific requests for hard copies for an event or other engagement, please reach out to us and we will see how we can accommodate or at least share files to facilitate that. After the webinar, we will also make these slides available. So if you just did not get enough today, you can read back through them at your leisure to understand, again, what the 7 briefs we have are. I expect those will come in the next day or 2. And additionally, this webinar has been recorded. So we'll be posting the recording from today's session. So if your friends, colleagues were not able to join but were interested, please go ahead and share it with them. And again, just let us know if you have questions or need additional information or resources. So with that, I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions, comments, if anyone in the room would like to say anything.
I think I'd like to hear from many of the council members if they have any comments. Umesh, are you on the call? I don't, perhaps he's not. Julie, or any other council members?
Umesh, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear now. Sorry, I was trying to unmute, but it would not let me unmute. Can you hear okay now?
Yeah,
Yes.
very well.
Yeah. But first of all, thank you for this lovely overview. I had not realized myself that you had updated all these materials. They look fantastic, and so congratulations. I think my one question that immediately comes to mind is in terms of access to these lovely resources for countries. I know many of them, for example, the ones that are introducing are now looking at the new available Indian vaccines. And so this information could be very valuable and useful for them. And I was wondering how countries get access to these documents. Are they aware? Is it only through the council website, or are there links to these through some of the sites where they are likely to go, like Gavi or WHO, or is that even a possibility to do?
Thank you, Umesh. That's a really great question. And we certainly design these with countries in mind. So we do want to make sure that we are facilitating access to them however we can. The documents will live on our ROTA Council website just to allow us a bit of control to make sure if there are any issues, we can address them promptly. or any updates that need to be made, we can do that. But we will be disseminating them broadly. So this group on the webinar is sort of our first look. You all are in the vanguard here of getting to see these briefs as they've been developed and have a first stab at them. But we'll be sharing them with our council partners, with partners at Gavi, WHO, UNICEF, through a couple other projects and initiatives, including our council partners, PATH, SABIN, CDC, others. We'll be sharing them as well. So anybody is welcome to forward them as broadly as you'd like. These are public resources. So whatever we can do to ensure they are reaching countries, particularly those that are in the midst of decision making as we speak, absolutely agree.
Julie or anybody else, Tony or George or Oyewale, or any of you on the call or have any comments on Zoom?
Hello.
Yes.
Hi. Hi, Jules.
So,
Sorry, we're gonna unmute people individually, just to get rid of some background noise. Just bear with us for a minute.
so who's speaking right now?
Julie Weiss.
Is it Julie?
Let's go to Julie.
All right, Julie. Maybe.
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You can hear me?
Yes, very well. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. Look, thank you very much for compiling and presenting all this, you know, terrific body of work. I think the main use will be, you know, it's such having this data all reviewed and concise to be able to have, you know, to be there for people to access in a very easy to read format, to be able to make sure that they're familiar with the data, the evidence that supports that data and what they're talking about is it's going to be incredibly helpful. One thing I did want to ask is, one thing that I've personally found very useful when I've been talking to audiences is the use of some of the graphics in PowerPoint. Will any of this be accompanied by some of those graphics in a PowerPoint way, so that people, if they're talking to a larger audience or for healthcare workers or speaking about the vaccines and options, that there will be a PowerPoint accompaniment to some of these graphics?
I'll let Molly respond. She's been smiling while we were talking.
Yes, I feel like this is a perfect setup, Julie. Thank you. Yes, on the previous white paper, we developed an accompanying slide deck. So really broke down the entire booklet into a long slide deck that could be, you could kind of pick and choose what you needed from it. In that same spirit, we will be developing a slide deck to reflect these briefs, which can be used again as a full body of all of the content or specific sections, including specific graphics. So yes, there will be that resource available. And as we do so, that's something that's very easy for us to modify. So as we get feedback from yourself and from other users, we can adapt that slide deck to make sure it's meeting the needs of end users. And I'm realizing I failed to mention sort of the ultimate use of these materials and what you can expect at the end once all of them are complete and available. The idea of developing these into a series of briefs rather than one document was to allow agility in their use. So we wanted you to be able to pick and choose what content you want or need to share, but also to have the option of providing this as a package. So ultimately, once all of these are made available on the website, there will be an additional mini brief that accompanies them, which you can think of as sort of an executive summary. And that will pull those key messages that I highlighted from each brief into one place. So if you are going to meet with somebody or you're engaging in an event or other meeting of some kind where you really need to just spotlight the overview of where we are with rotavirus disease and vaccines and paint that picture quite quickly, there will be a summary brief that captures all 7 in one place. So as a user, you have the option to use that one overview brief and the slides that would therefore go along with that, or to package all of these together or to use 2 or 3, whatever it might be. The name of the game here was flexibility and meeting the needs of those end users rather than kind of providing an overwhelming amount of information for someone who may just be interested in one specific component of it. So yes, to answer your question, Julie, there will be slides that come out from this, and those will be made available very soon, and we'll really focus on a lot of the graphics that have been developed under this series.
I think we should hear from Tony next.
Yes. Tony, are you available?
Yep, I'm available. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, no, congratulations. They look fantastic. I just wasn't quite clear that they're going to be available as PDFs, obviously on the site. But in terms of print copies, would they be available as well, like in a folder, or would that be up to individual countries or whatever to print their own?
Thanks, Tony. So in general, these are going to be living as electronic files to allow individuals to print them as needed. We will likely have a stash of hard copies available in a folder for specific use in council engagement or meeting with high-level policymakers. So that's something that we can discuss as the need arises. But in general, our plan is to maintain these as electronic files for print. The main reason behind that is that the content is so dynamic and there are so many changes that we want to make sure we're not producing these as hard copies that are then outdated almost immediately. So that's our kind of motive behind that. But as I mentioned, if anyone has a specific thing, particularly if there are large meetings or events that really would benefit from having this resource provided to participants, please send us a message. And we are more than happy to at least discuss or share the files as a package to make it a bit easier for you to download.
So each brief is, I guess, would be a number of pages. So it's not like a single sheet, is it?
Correct.
But there would be.
Yeah, so our shortest brief is our rotavirus vaccine safety brief, which is a total of 4 pages, or 2 double-sided pages if you're printing that way. And our longest is 12 pages, so 12 single or 6 double-sided pages.
And I mean, I guess just my other thought is, I mean, often a one-page sort of summary is also quite useful as well. But
Tony,
you're going to put all those into just one overall summary. Is that right?
Yeah. So I mentioned that we're going to do an executive summary, which will be my guess is probably about 4 pages, just collating all of these into one. And the length of that is largely because in addition to those key points that we want to highlight, we'd also like to include some graphics from these, some of the most compelling ones in each. But to your point, yes, our intent with this is to essentially build a portfolio of resources around this updated series of briefs. So that would include this executive summary overview version, slides for each section and as a whole. And then, yes, a brief one-pager summary that can really just very quickly run through some of the key components. Because of the sort of order of operations for each of these and trying to prioritize those that we think are most critical and most effort intensive early on so that we can make sure they're available as quickly as possible. That one pager is probably the 3rd thing on the list in our development process. So I would guess it would be a couple more weeks for it, but it's good to hear that there's an ask for it that will gives us the reason to prioritize.
Yeah, great, fantastic, thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
Saman, are you on the call? Would you be able to make a couple of comments?
Dr. Dama, can you try unmuting yourself if you're muted? We could come back.
Okay. Anyone else have any other questions? Anybody else on the call?
We have a request from Madagascar for a link to the economic cost of rotavirus disease versus the value of vaccine to use for communication and advocacy.
Great. Yeah, so we expect the economic costs of rotavirus disease and the value of vaccines brief will be coming out and posted to our website probably within the next week or 2. That's one that we are refining as we speak to finalize. So once that is available, we will send a message out over email to everybody on this webinar, as well as our broader listserv, to let you know that it's available and can be downloaded. So yes, we're happy to share that with you. Like my guess would be, let's say, within the next 2 weeks. Any other questions?
Is Allison Clifford or Laura Callan on?
Is anyone from PATH on this call?
Okay, yeah, they might be on mute, but
Okay. And anybody from Sabin? Okay, I assume, is Lulu on the call? Are you there, Lulu?
Lulu, we're trying to unmute you, and oh, I think you're unmuted.
It says unmuted. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I've been here since the beginning, and I'm so overwhelmed. I think this is something that we could readily use. Per brief is really going to have the key facts, and to me, I always feel that the simpler it is, and point by point, we can give it to our policymakers. I know the health professionals, at least from the Philippines, they know most of this, but it is the policymakers that we are having problems of. They do have all of this, specifically the economic cost and the broader impact, because I feel they don't understand really the impact of childhood diarrhea. And although, as Molly said earlier, that this does not necessarily point to rotavirus, we have always thought that people take diarrhea for granted. And the fact that they don't die so much from diarrhea nowadays, but more on just the hospitalization, is something that they really have to focus on, because people will think that somehow it is associated with like malnutrition in the future. They could actually lead to more severe diseases if they continue to have this diarrheal episode. And to me, you know, one by one, you can actually focus on different target population for each of these. To me, the biggest for our policymaker will be the economic cost and the broader impact of early childhood diarrhea. And I think something for the health professionals, you can focus on the rotavirus vaccine safety and I guess the epidemiology and disease burden. So I really appreciate this. Each of these brief could actually be focusing more. I mean, they can all be, but I think you can focus each of these, get one to a particular target population that you have. You see, I've been always working more on our policymakers and decision makers. Just recently, I've been telling them, you know, I can debate on between PCV and ROTA, that ROTA has a better impact. I mean, has a greater impact when it comes to our malnutrition index. Why in the Philippines, we don't have too many, we have not improved our malnutrition in the last 25 years. And this is something that I think we should really be able to do. Get those briefs to each, you know, identify where you can really focus on. So, you know, congratulations, Molly. I really like this.
And Molly and Rose did a lot of work on this. I want to thank them for what they've done. I do also want to make a comment. Lula, I really appreciate your comments. I just don't want us to be setting up competition between antigens. I think children need ROTA vaccine, pneumo vaccine, hip vaccine, and all of that. I'd like to see us as being advocates for vaccines in general for children. I do appreciate the fact that, as Molly pointed out, that there's significant consequences of rotavirus diarrhea on growth and development.
So thank you all for the comments. I think the team has been hard at work at these, and really want to thank all the council members who have just chimed in, and our partners at PATH and Sabin, CDC, the Gates Foundation, and others for the immense amount of effort in not only developing these, but going through extensive review to make sure that they are absolutely reliable and are great resources from both the usability perspective and as technical materials for use in countries. And absolutely agree with what Dr. Santosham is saying. We really want to spotlight the importance of rotavirus vaccines for children around the world, and particularly in some of the countries that have yet to introduce the vaccine. And we talked briefly about middle and high-income countries lagging particularly far behind. But it is not just those regions. So please, as these come out, take a look through, and hopefully they can be really useful resources as you're engaging in both program, policy, and advocacy efforts in your countries. We did have a couple other questions come through the chat, and so I want to try and answer them really briefly. But again, please feel free to reach out to us with any additional questions, especially as you start to read through these briefs as they're released. If you have follow-up questions, and I do want to caveat all of this with, while these are intended to be short, kind of snackable versions of this wealth of evidence on each of these topics, we do have additional content that will be living on our website in the future. So these documents themselves are not the end of the literature and evidence available. There's a lot more to say, and we want to make sure that's also available to you. So again, we will share those updates as they are posted to the web. One of the questions that came up just briefly in our last couple minutes was about the availability of a blow-fill seal presentation for any of the rotavirus vaccines currently on the market. So I have two parts to this answer, and hopefully this will be clear. The briefs that you see in front of you and the analysis that we did is based on products that were currently available as of the end of 2018, early 2019. So when we talk about our WHO pre-qualified products, those are the vaccines and presentations that are pre-qualified at that time. And as far as the upcoming products, we really try to highlight some of the new technologies that are being used. So not all products coming onto the market in the next couple of years are in phase 3 trials, but some of those examples of, for lack of a better word, promising new types of products that are on the way. The availability of a BFS presentation of rotavirus vaccine is something that is coming soon, but is not highlighted in these briefs. However, there is some information that is available through a number of other resources, and we are happy to share that. One of the things that we try to do as the council is be that kind of warehouse of information and respond to your questions, even if it's directing you to other resources. So hopefully that helps answer that question a little bit. If you have more specific questions, please go ahead and send them to us over email or over the chat about that BFS presentation. We're happy to elaborate. But again, the product landscape, like introductions, is a really dynamic space, and we recognize that what we have in here can be outdated a day from now. So we really wanted to focus on those products that have been available and pre-qualified, and we will work to update this, at least on the website side, as new information becomes available, which we anticipate could happen at any time. There's a lot of progress being made in the product development side. So with that, I think we are actually at time. Thank you all so much for joining us for this webinar. Hopefully this was a great kind of crash course in these new resources that will be available. You can expect some information coming your way in the next couple days about the availability of these documents on our website and how to find them. We will work to update them and update our web content as well as we move forward. If you have questions, please go ahead and visit rotacouncil.org or send an email to anyone on our team, and we will be happy to connect you. So thank you again so much.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your time. I know you're all extremely busy, but please do contact us if we can provide any more information. Thank you, and have a good day or good night. We'll talk to you all again soon, I hope.